who is the Republican nominee for the 2nd District. And he is a banker and was a high-level official in the Bush administration. And also he has the best name of an organization of anybody who's ever spoken at the Delta Conference, the Delta Trust. And French, I'm registered to vote in the 2nd District, and I'm not saying that that would be the only consideration, but that's definitely something to think about when I cast my vote, is that you got that great name. But anyway, we'll welcome French.
Ideas for economic development, and then Lee and I have questions, and the audience will ask some questions. Is that how it'll work?
Good. Thank you, Rex. Lee, thanks for the invitation today. It's a pleasure to be with you. Judge, I'm looking forward to that breakout session. Hope you'll invite me back. It's a treat to be before you to speak to the Delta Caucus. Last time I had a chance to be with this group was back in 2008. And I spoke on behalf of a guy from Arkansas named Mike Huckabee, who was running for president at that time, and gave remarks from him on his behalf to you. Thank you for letting me be with you today. A little background I wanted to start out with before I get into some policy ideas. As Rex Nelson certainly knows, and my friend Sam Chafin, I've got a long personal and professional association with the Delta. I grew up on my grandmother and great-aunt's stories of pioneering and farming in the Delta. They shared tales of loss from flood and depression, battles, lost swords, a long-lost hotel owned by one of their relatives in the village of Napoleon, Judge, on the banks of the Arkansas and Mississippi rivers. And you know, we can all relate to Will Percy's wonderful tribute to the region. When you speak about the river, though there are many, you mean always the same one, the great river, the shifting, unappeasable god of the country, feared and loved, the Mississippi. And I'm a history buff, as Rex knows, so I can't help but when I think about the flood of 27 and think about Greenville and South Arkansas, the first time it flooded like that recorded by Western civilization was in 1543, when DeSoto stood at Greenville, and the river was flooded 60 miles in all directions. And I found that fascinating, because that bit of trivia still carries us forward. As a community banker in Ashley and Chico County, which is where our company is located, I love those warm days in the fall when you hear the droning of the combine or the picker in the background and the smell of those freshly defoliated cotton plants. And I love the optimism that you see in the Delta every spring when it comes to land kind of swarms back to life and swings into production for this year's bounty. So it's a pleasure to be with you today and talk about the role of the public sector and the private sector in the Mississippi Delta region. Back in 1999, I started Delta Trust, and our first investment was in Southeast Arkansas in Ashley and Chico County. We bought the Bank of Southeast Arkansas Bank in Parkdale, Wilmot, Eudora, and Hamburg. Our world headquarters was in Parkdale. Population 275. Now it was 375 when we invested in 1999. It's down 33%. There are 100 fewer people living in the little town of Parkdale and Val Bartholomew. We did not seek, nor were we ever offered, any financial help or special incentives from any governmental entity, development board, or chamber of commerce to make that investment. It was an investment purely made on the competence, based on the 90 years of success that bank already had experienced. The fine company located in Southeast Arkansas and their very experienced staff. Our plan was built on the solid prospect of, from the banks of Val Bartholomew, growing that business, not only in the Delta, but across Arkansas, and in fact across the nation, and that we have. We've expanded employment, invested in technology, added extensive new products and services, all while remaining true to our commitment of small town values of personal trust and service. I am proud that when we bought that interest Somebody needed broadband services in Parkdale, primarily us. And so we ran the first high-speed T1 line from somewhere. I don't know if it came, Judge, from coming from Monticello, or it came from Pine Bluff down Highway 65, but high-speed came to Parkdale. We financed farmers across the region, small businesses, local infrastructure projects, and many proud homeowners in those two counties. And we were proud recently to be the bank that was selected to provide the financial resources to reconnect rail service for the first time in decades from Lake Providence to McGee. And we were proud to be involved in what I consider a major, that is a public-private partnership, to bring that intermodal service into McGee, Arkansas, from the chemical plant down at Lake Providence. We've raised money for local hospitals and school foundations, and in short, we've had a great partnership in the Delta. And as a result, we've earned a great return on our capital and had the pleasure of working with wonderful, warm, well-trained, nicely educated employees in those two counties. Over the past 14 years, our business grew from about $50 million, headquartered at Parkdale, to now $450 million, and scattered, as I say, across our country. So to me, the Mississippi Delta is not rural flyover land. It's a story land. It's not just a story land of history, music, and cotton, but it's a story land of change and innovation with the growth of business and transportation hubs in Jackson and Memphis, Little Rock. It's a story of innovation and success in education, like the KIPP Schools program in Helena, the Workforce Training Hub at West Memphis, and the expansion of Arkansas State and frequently recognized classrooms down in Portland. It's a story land where thousands of Americans travel to the region to visit their roots, their heritage, enjoy the birthplace of the blues, and appreciate the world-renowned hunting and fishing. It's a story of innovations in steel, where global trendsetters at Nucor and now Big River loomed large over the sunken New Madrid lands of long ago. And it's a place where the badly needed financial literacy is being expanded across the region, and access to capital through the economic developers, bankers, and my friends, particularly at Southern Development Bancorp and Enterprise Corporation of the Delta. The people in this room, not those that are not present, but share your passion, are writing today's story. And to me, the story of the Delta is not about the past, but it's about the future. Given our declining populations and consolidating school districts, I believe the number one issue facing the Delta is educational excellence and opportunity. I believe the answer will not come from Washington. I believe the answer will come from parents, from local school districts, and local business stakeholders. We must continue to innovate both in teaching and in administrative techniques such as KIPP, continued investments in broadband, and take advantage of outside engagement like Teach for America programs. Something that's important to me that I think would add value in the region is an aspirational guidance counselor. Because, we're at a loss for the spirit some places in this country. Not a lack of money or a lack of will, but a lot of people in rural America and in poverty don't have an aspirational guidance counselor. This person could be a Teach for America type outside resource. Each coach would have maybe 300 to 400 students, and starting in the 7th or 8th grade, the coach would encourage students to stay in high school, graduate, stay true to high standards of character and behavior, demonstrate engagement with their local community. And most of all, that young person would have a plan designed to help them in their post-high school life. Whether it's a career in the military, an apprenticeship at Nucor, a work-study program at Big River, an externship with a local farmer or manufacturer, or on to 2 or 4 year education experience, we need that kind of personalized intervention with all of our kids to make sure that they graduate and they know where they're going after they graduate. You can see this working in Munster, Ohio, where they have a skilled trades ambassador there that's working significantly, recruiting people into small business and the trades. We know that about 50% of all STEM jobs, which are growing rapidly in our state, don't require a four-year college degree. In regard to our nation's healthcare system, the future holds massive consolidation. It will rival that which has rocked the financial services industry since deregulation in 1980. It will be driven by many of the same factors: high fixed costs, technology demands, limited talent in some regions, massive regulations, and government intrusion. As a result of these headwinds, we should encourage policies that are more nimble in improving primary care for our patient populations in rural areas. Community health centers have played a role like that. Community-based hospitals have stakeholders that are trying to keep them competitive. They should be allowed to innovate in trying to maintain that competitive position and serve their localities. In my view, the best days of our country are ahead of us in business, and the Delta plays a prosperous role in that as well. Over the next 2 decades, I expect manufacturing to return to the U.S. This trend has already begun, and there are leaders like Walmart that have commenced a major reshoring initiative. The most important components of this megatrend include innovation and workforce training, back to my point on excellence in high school, but it also, we must stop our schools from floundering and make sure that they flourish. Local officials must have the courage to reject failure and make the tough choices that cause flourishing, not floundering. Federal and state regulatory policy should ensure that overregulation and micromanagement not smother that innovation. With rising wage rates in Asia and technological productivity gains in the U.S., that manufacturing will come back to our country. Made America will be more competitive. And our first time to control our natural destiny and energy will aid that as well. It will offer us a wonderful opportunity to provide low-cost, secure energy, something that Asia and Europe do not possess. In short, North American energy independence will boost this manufacturing renaissance in our country. The Mississippi Delta is a competitive region with ample rail, highway, and river transportation. You mix that in with a great workforce, and you've got a well-placed geography that absolutely will lead the way in that manufacturing renaissance. And you don't have to look any closer than Osceola to understand that. Our future is brighter than our past. Let's work together to ensure it. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Let's start with healthcare reform. Talk a little bit about your position on the Affordable Care Act, and if you go to Congress, obviously it is now the law of the land, but it will be subject to debate in the next Congress where you would come down on that issue.
Yeah, I've been clear on that. I've said from the beginning that I felt like the Affordable Care Act was rushed and ill-considered, and I would not have voted for it on its passage. I think it's had a rocky rollout with a lot of challenges ahead of it, and I just don't believe that the American people are fully supportive of it, meaning that the total cost, I think, outweigh some of the key benefits of the act. So I would be a voice for repeal if possible, and replacement or reform. And to me, those key points are the mandate aspects of it. Mandating businesses and mandating a set of preordained, one-size-fits-all standards. And so to me, the biggest problem I have with it is the mandate aspect of it and the sort of overlay of an already existing health delivery system and insurance system, this federal approach.
The Farm Bill was a compromise and therefore was perfect as a compromise would be, but would you have voted for it? And we all know that agriculture is very important in Arkansas, but another very important part of it, and in fact, about 80% of the funding regards the SNAP program, and there's been a lot of improvement on the waste, fraud, and abuse. It's down to slightly over 1%. Moody's Analytics estimates that every dollar spent on SNAP increases GDP by about $1.73. The benefits are relatively small, $4.50 today. So would you be supportive of the SNAP?
Well, the question was, am I supportive of the Farm Bill? And The answer is yes, I would have been supportive of the Farm Bill. I would have, and I've talked about that before, but I would have, and I thought it was a good idea for the American taxpayers and the American people to see the food assistance piece broken out for a separate vote. So if that had come up to, and it did, to separate the two, I would have supported for that separation so that we see the ag programs and how they work, and that the American taxpayer fully see how the SNAP program and the food assistance programs work, how much it is, and what can be done to improve it. We have that program. I think everything we can do to reform it, make it better, make it more accountable, make sure that the people who are on it really need it, all those sorts of steps are key to having the credibility of that SNAP and food assistance program.
You make clear that you're a fiscal conservative, and in a time of tight federal dollars, talk a little bit about your philosophy on infrastructure, highways, interstates, even broadband. Going to Congress, would you support increased spending, especially in rural areas, for programs such as this?
Yeah. So on the topic of highways, there's a long-standing, obviously, federal-state combined role there in highway finance. It's under a lot of pressure right now as people move to reauthorize. My judgment there is a role for the federal government in highway finance, where we've created that. The question is, how do you spend that money? How do you prioritize it? And those are the things that I think we should focus on in that kind of infrastructure support. We don't have any more money to, quote, expand spending per se until we get this economy growing again. A growing economy is how you have opportunities to have additional resources. But with $17 trillion in debt, we've got to be extremely focused in how we spend our financing and trying to get control of the federal budget. But obviously there's a role for the federal government in highway finance. How do we set those priorities? How do we work with states to do that is the biggest challenge, and it's a nationwide challenge. And I think rural states are always struggling because they don't have the density, they don't have the traffic flow, they don't have the commercial demand that you have in big urban areas where they tend to take a lot of those resources. So the rural delegations have to work really hard for what to get.
Follow up on that real quickly. A lot of talk in the region represented here by Interstate 69. Is that a program you support, the completion of Interstate 69, and obviously billions of dollars that would eventually cost?
Yeah, I think when we think about western Arkansas in the corridor from Bentonville towards Laredo, and the 69 corridor from the Midwest passing through Arkansas to border traffic. These are long-term, 50, 100-year kinds of strategies for our country to pursue. I think what taxpayers have to know is it's going to be slow and steady progress to improve that traffic back and forth for our economic development. But I think it's wrong to set out sort of George Babbitt boosterism type approaches that it's just around the corner and we're going to connect Highway 69 or other corridors. The point is that it's on the plan. We've got to all work for it, but it's a multi-year, hopefully not multi-generational, but multi-year task. And but remember, we've also got this budget constraint that's going to make it even slower potentially.
We appreciated your comment earlier that educational excellence is such a high priority for you because most of our partners see education as a key to a brighter future for our region. So what would you propose to improve pre-K-12 and increase opportunities for federal aid to education without saddling people with huge student loan debt?
Yeah. So a couple of different questions there, really. You've got 2 or 3 of us talking. In the elementary area, the most important thing that I've seen in elementary education, this isn't a question of more money, it's a question of priority and a question of focus. And what I see in the civic sector, in our church, home, civic sector, Rotary Club sector, if we can bond with these school districts and get these kids reading by 3rd grade. You've seen the good work by the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation backing that program. You've seen civic clubs go for it because, and you've heard the mantra, everybody in this room knows all about it, but that should be our K through sort of 6 or K through 8 goal, is to make sure that our children can read in line with third grade type expectations. That allows them to progress. That's not an expensive thing to achieve. I think it's achievable with the dollars being expended. It's a question of focus by school boards and school leaders. In high school and middle school, I talked a little bit about, and I don't want to take more of your time, so I've talked a little bit about what I think would help them, which is to set up some aspirational objectives. For people, we want you to stay in school. We want you to have a plan, and if you don't have that kind of support in your life, we want to help you develop it. But again, think how, in the great scheme of things, how inexpensive that is, really. You've got to have caring adults engaged with this student population, no matter how poor or how bright. And I'm passionate about that. On the student loan thing, for our college kids, wow, what a change from the time that many of you went off to college. Staggering. And we focus a lot on the $1 trillion in student loan debt, when we ought to think about, well, what are the causes of prices going up so much in higher ed? One is state legislatures are cutting back on what they give higher ed and moving those burdens to the student and their parents. Secondly, what about administrative cost burdens versus classroom burdens or opportunities at the higher ed level? Something that we debate all the time in K-12. So I think we should do more out there on the supply of education side to being more, making sure we're being as cost effective as we can in providing that educational opportunity for both public and private institutions. And instead of saying, well, it's somebody's fault that student loan debt is high, it should be a priority of legislators to tackle that issue.
Let's move to energy policy. You spoke very eloquently about the agricultural roots of the Delta. As you know, we've debated for years, for instance, the size, if any, of federal subsidies for things like corn ethanol. Talk a little bit about what do you think the federal role ought to be, whether it's ethanol or biomass or other renewable energy.
Well, I think in various places around the country, different kinds of renewables are more competitive and more appropriate and require less subsidy to be successful. Where you get hydroelectric in the Northwest, or you get wind in very, very high wind corridors, where the wind energy can be generated and put immediately into the grid for consumption. So a lot of this depends as a geographic issue when you think about renewable energy. What I've never been comfortable with is a federal policy that causes us to set food on fire to make fuel. So I think some of the ethanol mandates and some of that have been overdone as it relates to the corn stocks in our country. And I was pleased to see that the Congress and the administration, for example, dropped the tariff on imported ethanol, so that is a good blending agent for gas that can be used and bought more off the free market. So I'm in all of the above on renewables. I think we ought to be experimenting. We ought to be doing R&D. We ought to see what the allocation of resources out there in the capital markets warrants. But everybody in this room, again, should be very, in my judgment, realistic about how renewables contribute to the entire energy picture in our country. It's very small, and it's going to grow larger over a long period of time. But it is not, again, something to hold out as the great promise that it's going to change our energy, our energy future. That rests with being as clean as we can in the use of fossil fuels to generate electricity for our manufacturing.
One of our major themes for this conference is women issues, because we have alarmingly high poverty rates for women, especially single mothers in our region. And would you support equal pay for women for the same work, and how would you address economic inequality for women?
Big social challenge. I mean, in my judgment, people who work the same hours, perform the same tasks, have the same background, do precisely the same kind of contribution, obviously should be paid for that work in a similar fashion. I'm not a supporter of legislation to do that. For inequality, the best thing we can do to fight inequality is to try to get this economy growing, get jobs performing, get people to invest in our communities, and begin to grow their business. Growing businesses can pay very competitive wages that are far in excess of barely subsistent wages. We ought to all work at policies that improve the ability to create jobs and get our economy growing.
Well, just one final point. We all know the gridlock in Washington, D.C. is terrible. Would you oppose government shutdowns in the future? And how can we do that? How can we accomplish that? I know that's a tough question.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can talk about that question philosophically. First of all, government shutdowns have been sort of a part of the tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch for decades. Mr. Carter, as president, had many weeks of government shutdown, many days of government shutdowns during his presidency with two houses of Congress, both controlled by his same party. So it's not always something that's a partisan issue. There is a constructive tension between the executive and the legislative. I think while that happens from time to time, modestly in the Reagan and Bush administrations, some during the Clinton administration, it's gotten to be such an issue recently. And it should be done as humanely as possible if it comes to that, meaning that people should try to make the lightest impact on the American taxpayer and citizen, if it ever comes to that, instead of the maximum impact, which is the way I felt last fall. I don't know about you. So government shutdowns are not a prudent policy per se, but they do happen, and they've happened across American history. And I think the government's obligation is to make those as short as possible and minimal as possible. Try to avoid them as possible.
Could we get a question from the audience?
Yes, sir. That's the station.
I noticed in the past, since the president's gotten under his block, extremists have showed such as Tom Cruise, Michelle Obama. If you're elected, would you call it?
Well, I'm not sure what that means, except I can say to you that I consider myself a person of great civility and great respect for other people and their views. And what we ought to all be working on every day in Congress is to move our country forward, particularly policies that will improve our economy, improve opportunities for hardworking families to have better jobs and higher incomes. You know, I just don't believe in the politics of attacking people personally. I think the way you should operate is to use the facts and let the facts speak. I appreciate your question. I think you'll find, if I'm lucky enough to represent the 2nd District, that you'll find me to be a person who tries to speak from a basis of facts and talks about the best interest of our district at heart, and a person will try to do that as civilly as possible.
Well, I guess you've educated everybody. If you don't have any more questions.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Is State Representative Bruce Westman here?
He's here. Good morning, Representative. Bruce Westman is the Republican nominee in the 4th Congressional District of Arkansas. He was the majority leader in the Arkansas House of Representatives. He is from Hot Springs, and the way we were going to handle